Last time, we looked at 8 UFC fighters whose lives spiraled into infamy once the fighting stopped, but those were only half the stories. Because behind the bright lights and championship belts, there are even more fighters whose legacies were consumed not by glory but by darkness. Today, we continue the countdown with 9 more names. Men whose paths after fighting became more terrifying than any opponent they ever faced inside the cage. Phil Baroni. Phil Baroni, the New York Badass, was once one of MMA's most recognizable names, a fighter with explosive power and an unforgettable personality, known for his knockout ability and brash confidence. Baroni built a reputation as both a dangerous striker and an entertainer who always brought intensity to the cage. For years, it seemed like his name would be etched into MMA history as one of the sport's true originals, but what happened outside the fights would eventually consume any memory of his accomplishments inside them. Baroni never captured a UFC title, but he left his mark with highlight reel finishes and rivalries that fans still remember. His career, however, slowly declined as losses piled up, and outside the cage, his life spiraled in ways that no one could ignore. In January 2023, everything came crashing down. Baroni was arrested in San Pancho, Mexico, having reported his girlfriend unresponsive in their hotel room. But when officers arrived, they uncovered a horrific scene. A woman, later identified as Paola, lying naked on the bed with 37 visible injuries across her body, bruises, contusions, and wounds from head to toe. Baroni's explanation: he claimed the two were under the influence of alcohol and marijuana, and when she revealed an affair, he threw her into the shower. She allegedly hit her head twice, and he then laid her on the bed, covered her with a blanket, and briefly left the room, returning to find her dead. But the injuries told a much darker story. The charges were severe. A Mexican judge formally charged Phil Baroni with aggravated femicide, a crime that carries a sentence of 30 to 50 years under Nayorit law. But prosecutors pushed for even more, arguing that Baroni's background as a professional fighter made the brutality far worse, with some estimates placing his potential sentence between 50 and 75 years behind bars. Baroni was transferred to Sorriso Venustiano Carranza State Jail in Tepic to await trial. The case shook the MMA world to its core, transforming a controversial athlete into a cautionary emblem of unchecked aggression gone lethal. Diego Brandao, the very first winner of The Ultimate Fighter Brazil, was once a rising star in the UFC. Known for his explosive striking, slick submissions, and fiery personality, he was the kind of fighter who could light up a crowd in an instant. Inside the cage, he delivered flashes of brilliance, ending fights in spectacular fashion. But once the spotlight faded, the battles outside the cage would soon consume everything he had built. Though he never became a UFC champion, Brandao carved out his place in MMA history with highlight reel finishes and raw intensity. But as the losses piled up, his personal life outside the cage unraveled in ways far more destructive. In April 2016, Diego Brandao's career and reputation took a devastating turn. One night in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he was involved in a violent altercation at a strip club that would change his life forever. According to witnesses, Brandao was removed by security after a heated dispute, but instead of walking away, he came back armed with a firearm. Reports claimed he pointed the gun at staff members, threatening to shoot before fleeing the scene. When police caught up with him, the situation grew even worse. His explanation didn't line up with the accusations, but the evidence was damning. He was charged with aggravated battery and assault with a deadly weapon, both felonies carrying the potential for years behind bars. The UFC quickly released him, and the once promising fighter's career collapsed overnight. Travis Fulton, better known as the Iron Man, wasn't famous for titles or belts, but for something even wilder: the sheer number of fights he took. With over 300 professional bouts, he was a walking legend, a fighter who'd step into the cage with anyone, anytime, anywhere. Fans saw him as an iron-willed warrior, the ultimate journeyman who built a legacy on toughness and endurance alone. For years, it looked like his name would be etched in MMA history forever. But behind the record books, there was a darker story waiting to surface, one that would completely erase the memory of his achievements and leave the MMA world stunned. In 2019, everything came crashing down when he was arrested on federal charges tied to child pornography and the sexual exploitation of a minor. What investigators uncovered was beyond disturbing: thousands of illegal images and videos stored on his devices, with evidence suggesting his behavior stretched back years. In 2021, Fulton's story reached its darkest chapter. After years of legal battles, he finally pled guilty to federal charges, crimes so severe they carried a potential sentence of 20 years or more behind bars. The man once called the Iron Man was about to face a very different kind of fight, spending the rest of his life locked away. But before the judge could hand down his punishment, everything ended. Just weeks after entering his plea, Fulton was discovered unresponsive in his jail cell in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Authorities ruled it an apparent suicide. He was only 44 years old. For many, it was a chilling contradiction: a fighter who had built his identity on never giving up, who had stepped into the cage more times than anyone in history, had chosen to end his life before justice could be served. The MMA community was left stunned. Some mourned the competitor who fought endlessly, while others could only see the horrific crimes that led to his downfall. Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell, the Iceman, wasn't just a fighter. At his peak, he was the face of the UFC. The Mohawk, the icy stare, the crushing right hand that could end a fight in seconds. Liddell was the knockout artist who dragged MMA into the mainstream, headlining blockbuster pay-per-views and becoming the first fighter many casual fans could actually name. For years, he lived like a rock star. The parties, the fame, the endorsements. He wasn't just winning fights, he was living larger than life. But when the cage door finally closed for good, Chuck's world began to crumble. His legendary durability couldn't hold up forever, and as knockout after knockout piled up, the same fans who once cheered began to question if he had stayed in the sport too long. His retirement left a void, and without the structure of training camps and competition, life became far more complicated. By 2010, the Iceman's aura had cracked. Rumors swirled of heavy drinking and wild partying. Friends and former teammates quietly admitted Chuck was struggling to adapt to life outside the spotlight. The millions he had earned during his prime began to dwindle, and public appearances became more erratic. In October 2021, the Iceman's world took a dark turn. Liddell was arrested in Los Angeles after police responded to a domestic disturbance at his home. Reports claimed an argument with his wife had escalated, and when authorities arrived, Liddell was taken into custody on suspicion of domestic violence. He spent the night in jail before being released on bail. Liddell later claimed he wasn't the aggressor, that he willingly went with police to shield his children from the trauma of seeing their mother arrested. And while prosecutors ultimately dropped the charges, the damage had already been done. The image of the fearless champion who once defined toughness was now replaced with mugshots and scandal. The Iceman built a legacy that will live forever. But the battles outside the spotlight proved just as brutal as the ones inside, and in the end, they nearly destroyed him. Josh Grisby. Josh Grisby, once hailed as the Fluke, was one of MMA's brightest young prospects. Explosive, dangerous, and just 21 years old when he entered the UFC, Grisby was expected to be the next big thing. Known for his slick submissions and highlight finishes, he quickly built a reputation as a fighter with both talent and star potential. For a time, it looked like his name would be etched into the sport's history as one of its future champions. But that promise didn't last. After back-to-back losses in the UFC, Grisby's momentum collapsed. The bright future everyone saw for him started slipping away. And when the fighting stopped going his way, his personal life took an even darker turn, one that would destroy his career, his reputation, and his freedom. In 2014, Grisby's world came crashing down. He was arrested in Massachusetts on charges that shocked the MMA community, including assault and battery, witness intimidation, and multiple counts of domestic abuse against his wife. The details were chilling. Prosecutors alleged that Grisby not only assaulted her repeatedly, but even ordered his pit bull to attack her, using the dog as a weapon during violent outbursts. In 2019, Grisby pled guilty to multiple charges, including assault and battery, and was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. For a fighter once destined for stardom, it was the ultimate fall from grace. Abel Trujillo. Abel Trujillo was once seen as a promising lightweight in the UFC, a powerful wrestler with explosive striking and a reputation for finishing fights. Known for his intensity and athleticism, Trujillo quickly made a name for himself as a dangerous contender, picking up highlight reel knockouts and showing the kind of grit that made fans believe he could climb far in the division. For a time, it seemed like his future in MMA was bright. But behind the scenes, his life was already starting to unravel. Trujillo's run-ins with the law went back years, with arrests for domestic violence and other troubling behavior that hinted at a much darker side. Instead of staying focused on his career, he was spiraling into a pattern of reckless decisions that would ultimately destroy him. Then came the scandal that ended everything. In 2019, Trujillo was arrested on felony charges after police uncovered that he had been sending sexually explicit messages, photos, and videos to underage girls. Investigators revealed that he wasn't just chatting online, he was exchanging graphic material with multiple minors. When the news broke, it didn't just shock fans, it annihilated his reputation overnight. In court, Trujillo pled guilty to 1 felony count of sexual exploitation of a child. The sentence was devastating. 2 years of probation, mandatory sex offender treatment, and the permanent stain of being a registered sex offender. For a man who once fought in front of thousands of fans, cheered for his violent knockouts, this was the ultimate fall from grace. After that, his career was finished. No major promotion would touch him. The UFC cut ties. Smaller organizations refused to book him, and his name was effectively blacklisted from the sport. The same fighter who once stood inside the cage with legends was now standing in a courtroom, stripped of everything: his career, his reputation, and his future. Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez, the Nightmare, was once a fan favorite, a pioneer of modern MMA. He wasn't just the winner of the very first season of The Ultimate Fighter, he was the kind of fighter who bled for every victory. who walked into wars that fans still talk about to this day. From his legendary battle with Clay Guida to his brutal wars with Gilbert Melendez and BJ Penn, Diego built his reputation on pure grit, unmatched intensity, and an iron will. He wasn't the most technical, he wasn't the cleanest striker, but he was the fighter who would never quit. But after the lights dimmed, Diego's story turned into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. By the late 2010s, Diego's body was breaking down, his career spiraling into losses, and his personal life already strained. Then came Joshua Fabia, a self-proclaimed guru with no real credentials. Fabia entered Diego's life as a coach, mentor, and confidant. But what began as guidance soon twisted into control. Fabia isolated him from friends, family, and longtime teammates, people who had been there since the beginning. Suddenly, the same fighter who once embodied independence and toughness looked like a man trapped in someone else's grasp. Videos began surfacing that horrified fans, training sessions where Fabia chased Diego around with knives. Fabia forced Diego into disturbing drills, tying his arms, hanging him upside down, and striking his head with punches and kicks. Even press conferences where Fabia spoke for Diego, lashing out at the media and UFC staff while Diego sat silently by his side. It wasn't the Diego Sanchez the world knew, it was someone broken down, manipulated, and paraded for humiliation. Things reached a breaking point in 2021. Concerns grew over Diego's health, with Fabia allegedly interfering in medical procedures and withholding documents. The UFC, fearing for his safety, released him after nearly 2 decades in the promotion. Just like that, the nightmare was gone from the biggest stage he had ever known, not with a grand send-off but with confusion, shame, and heartbreak. Since then, Diego's life has been marked by financial struggles, health concerns, and the lasting damage of years spent under manipulation. Brett Rogers, also known as the Grim, was once a name MMA fans couldn't ignore. A massive heavyweight with knockout power, Rogers rose quickly through the ranks, crushing opponents with his raw strength. His biggest moment came in 2009, when he shocked the fight world by knocking out former UFC champion Andrei Arlovski in just 22 seconds. Suddenly, Rogers wasn't just a prospect, he was a legitimate contender, standing across the cage from legends like Fedor Emelianenko and Alistair Overeem. For a brief moment it looked like he was destined for greatness. But that promise didn't last. As losses piled up, Rogers' life outside of fighting began to take a much darker turn. In 2011, his career collapsed overnight when he was arrested for a horrifying incident at home. Prosecutors revealed that Rogers viciously assaulted his wife in front of their children, punching her in the head and body, strangling her and beating her so badly she lost teeth. It wasn't just a crime. It was the kind of violence that shattered his image and left his once bright career in ruins. From there, things only got worse. Rogers was hit with probation, fines, and mandatory treatment, but he couldn't stay out of trouble. In the years that followed, he racked up more arrests, including multiple domestic violence cases and, in 2013, allegations of sexual misconduct. According to reports, Rogers was accused of groping men in public spaces, including a Minneapolis library, which led to criminal sexual conduct charges. The man who once stood toe-to-toe with Fedor was now reduced to mugshots, courtrooms, and jail time. By the mid-2010s, Brett Rogers had lost it all: his family, his career, his freedom, and the respect he once commanded. What began as a story of a hard-working powerhouse who rose from nothing became one of the darkest spirals in MMA history. Lee Murray wasn't just another fighter, he was a legend in the making, a ruthless striker with knockout power and the kind of street reputation that turned him into an underground icon. Fans remember him from Cage Rage, his brutal finishes, and even the infamous brawl in London where he allegedly dropped Tito Ortiz in front of half the UFC roster. Murray had the skills, the charisma, and the edge of a man who lived life like every night could be his last. If he had stayed on track, many believed he could have been one of the UFC's biggest stars. But Murray's downfall wasn't written in the cage, it was written in the streets. Behind the scenes, he was living a double life, fighting for glory by day and running with gangsters by night. Drugs, violence, and organized crime followed him everywhere. And when injuries derailed his fighting career, the criminal world swallowed him whole. In 2006, Murray orchestrated something so audacious it stunned the entire world: the Securitas Depot robbery in Tunbridge, England. Dressed as police officers, Murray and his crew kidnapped the depot manager and his family at gunpoint, forcing them to give up access to the vault. What followed was one of the biggest cash robberies in history, over $92 million stolen in a single night. For a moment, Murray wasn't just a fighter anymore, he was living like a crime lord. Exotic cars, luxury homes, endless parties in Morocco. It looked like he had pulled off the perfect heist. But greed and violence leave trails. Authorities closed in, and in 2006, Murray was captured in Morocco after a dramatic police chase. His dream of freedom evaporated instantly because he held Moroccan citizenship. He couldn't be extradited back to the UK, but that didn't save him. In 2010, Murray was convicted of armed robbery and handed a 25-year prison sentence. Later, his time behind bars was extended to 33 years. Today, the man who once had the world at his feet sits locked in a Moroccan prison, his body broken from old fights, his fortune long gone, and his reputation defined not by knockouts, but by betrayal, kidnapping, and the crime that destroyed his life. And there it is, 19 fighters who once lived under the lights, but ended up consumed by shadows. Some chased greatness, some barely made their mark, but in the end, all of them fell in ways that fans will never forget. If you missed part 1, go watch it now, and if you're ready for even more untold stories of how combat legends rose, fell, and lost everything, dive into the other videos on this channel, because inside the cage, fights are won and lost, but outside of it, the real battles decide who's remembered and who's forgotten. Asterisk.